Tomorrow, on October 7th, we reach a terrible anniversary in our world, and we are going to hold it together today with ritual. The following ritual was created by Patricia Pierce and Arthur Waskow as a way to grieve the terror and losses of September 11th, 2001, and to also turn away from the ongoing vengeance of war. This week, we lament the attack on civilians in Israel by Hamas on October 7th, and we lament a full year of ongoing attacks by Israeli forces against the people of Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon. This morning, we share this ritual of stones, ashes, and flowers to hold us, to help us weep for the 1,200 people killed in Israel by Hamas on October 7th. To help us weep for the tens of thousands of Palestinians killed by Israeli forces since that day. To help us remember that every single one of those mind-boggling numbers was a whole universe, a life that mattered, a person that dreamed and loved and was loved. We share this ritual to help us hold the unimaginable trauma of those who survived, now in fear and in literal or spiritual rubble. We share this ritual to draw near to families and loved ones torn apart by the impenetrable lines of warfare or by lines of division and distrust that suddenly feel impossible to bridge. We share this ritual to help us hold the families of Israeli hostages and detained Palestinians in heart as they keep their terrible vigils. We share this ritual to help us hold the humanity of each and all, including ourselves. This ritual is a litany in 3 sections. After each section, I will cast first ashes, then stones, then finally flowers into the sacred waters that hold us week after week. Now the words of Patricia Pierce and Arthur Waskow. For vibrant lives, suddenly and shamelessly sacrificed, we lift up the ashes of our loss, O source of life. For the lives that continue haunted forever by the pain of absence, we lift up the ashes of our trauma, O wellspring of compassion. For the conflagration of flames and nightmare images forever seared into our memories, we lift up the ashes of our pain, O breathing spirit of the world. For the charred visions of peace and the dry taste of fear, we lift up the ashes of our grief, O infinite one. For all the deaths that have been justified by turning the love of God or country into fanaticism, we lift up the ashes of our shame, O God. For the children, O God, for the children, we lift up the ashes of our devastation. As we cast these ashes into these sacred waters, transforming one, hear our plea, that by your power they will make fertile the soil of our future, and by your mercy nourish seeds of justice.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. For the ways humanity pursues violence rather than understanding, we lift up the stones of our anger, O breathing spirit of the world. For the ways we allow national, ethnic, and religious boundaries to circumscribe our compassion, we lift up the stones of our hardness, O wellspring of compassion. For our addictions to weapons and the ways of militarism, we lift up the stones of our fear, O source of life. For the ways we cast blame and create enemies, we lift up the stones of our self-righteousness, O God. As we cast these stones into these sacred waters, transforming one, hear our plea. Just as water wears away the hardest of stones, so too may the power of your compassion soften the hardness of our hearts and draw us into a future of justice and hope. And now, for sowing seeds of justice to block them into harmony, we cast these flowers into the water, O source of peace. For seeing clearly the many rainbow colors of humanity and earth, we cast these flowers into the water, O infinite one. For calling us to life beyond our grieving, we cast these flowers into the water, O breathing spirit of the world. For calling us to the work, the labor of humanity and hope beyond our despair, we cast these flowers into the water, O power of love. As we cast these flowers into the sacred water, transforming one, hear our plea. Just as water births life in the desert and gives hope to the wounded, so too may the power of human care renew our commitment to the dignity and thriving of each and all. May it be so. The poem Summons by Aurora Levins Morales. Last night I dreamed 10,000 grandmothers from the 1,200 corners of the earth walked out into the gap, one breath deep between the bullet and the flesh, between the bomb and the family. They told me we cannot wait for governments. There are no peacekeepers boarding planes. There are no leaders who dare to say every life is precious, so it will have to be us. They said we will cup our hands around each heart. We will sing the earth's song, the song of water, a song so beautiful that vengeance will turn to weeping. The mourners will embrace, and grief replace every impulse toward harm. 10,000 is not enough, they said, so we have sent this dream, like a flock of doves, into the sleep of the world. Wake up. Put on your shoes. You who are reading this, I am bringing bandages and a bag of scented guavas from my trees. I think I remember the tune. Meet me at the corner. Let's go. These were the words of Aurora Levins Morales. Dear ones, heavy of heart or bubbling with some sweet joy even so, we are here to draw near to one another, to draw near to all people, vast though the distances between us may be. We are here because life is fragile and irreplaceable. We are here because there are no leaders who dare to say every life is precious. There are no peacekeepers boarding planes, no salvation coming from any of the governments who have sacrificed the family in the floodplain, sacrificed the glaciers, sacrificed the civilian, sacrificed the species, sacrificed the hostage, sacrificed children in their schools in every nation, all for avarice and power. There is no salvation coming from the halls of power. It will have to be us. And there are many of us. So many across the globe, stepping into the gap, one breath deep between the bullet and the flesh, between the bomb and the family, between the famine and the child, between the pipeline and the river. There are many, so many, looking deep into their hearts in this age and wondering, how many times and in how many languages must we say it? Each life is precious. How In the shadow of the carelessness of empire, may we find the path to living it. Each life is precious. How, when our hearts are only the size of two hands clutching each other, and the world is the size of 8 billion people, and the stars are in our blood too, every person, a whole universe, how can we fathom it? Each life is precious. How, when our attention is so divided, and it's hard to pay the rent, and there are genocides in at least 6 places at once, how can we remember it? Each life is precious. How, when there is too much suffering for us to ever hold, the whole world an open wound, the soil polluted with bone and poisoned with blood, and still so breathtakingly beautiful. How can we dare to feel it? Each life is precious. How can we say it and be heard? How can we live it more fully? How can we remember it in every moment? How can we feel it with our whole hearts, unguarded and soft? How can we fathom it, this preciousness, this unrelenting love, this uncompromising care? It is true that we live amid compounding horrors, and that it is too much for hearts to hold. And listen, it is human to shut down or sink into despair or to harden in anger. Those are all normal responses. It is right to feel numb a while and to touch the bottom of our sorrow, wondering if it will ever resurface. It is right to see the edges of our vision go red in rage at so much callous disregard for life. And it is true that we are each so terribly afraid. This means you are seeing the world right. It is all true. Feel it. Let it move through you. Let it out in ways that are safe. Dance, weep, scream at the sky. Hold what you love tight in the safety of your 2 arms. Let it move through you. And don't get stuck. Because the 24-hour news cycle and the deadly corporations and the fascists and the hoarders of power would like you to get stuck. We are easy to use when our anger calcifies to hate. We are out of the way when we have lost all hope. We are quick to comply when we've lost all sensation to our souls. And we are so pliable when our terror turns to isolation. The powers and principalities that stamp out precious life, they depend on our hatred, our hopelessness, our cynicism, and our isolation. They thrive on it. They are thriving on it right now. They are eating it all up and turning it into horror upon horror upon horror. Which is why we must feel it through our bodies. Why we must turn that hatred back to anger, the hopelessness back to despair, the cynicism back to numbness, the isolation back to fear, and then feel them and move them through us to make way for something better, because anger can also become deep solidarity. And despair can be linked to grieving love. Even our numbness can give us the distance to find clarity. And our fear can turn into fierce protection of our human kin. We must metabolize these sensations through our bodies. We must metabolize them into grief, softness, and love. We must remember that the idea that our safety can come from the suffering of others is always a vicious lie. Our safety can only ever come from the safety of others. We are only ever safe together. We must remember that the idea that some suffering matters more than others is always a vicious lie, as is the idea that some suffering is more acceptable than others. We are always bound together in our matter. Each life is special. Each life is precious. But here is the terrible truth. Buried in your mind and in mine are seeds of dehumanization. The creeping suspicion that some life matters more, that some suffering is more acceptable, that somebody has to suffer after all, and it should definitely be them, whoever they may be. These seeds are planted willy-nilly and everywhere from birth, through the culture around us, in the media, in our education systems, especially in our criminal justice system. It is planted in our families, even in the charities set up to help, and yes, it is in our religion sometimes, and definitely in our politics. Creeping suspicion that some life matters more, that some suffering is more acceptable. That somebody has to suffer after all, and it should definitely be them, whoever they may be. And we see these seeds going wild at the moment. There is an absolute dehumanization of Arab peoples in the media and from the seats of power. We are told they are terrorists who had it coming, human shields or terrorists in training. There are intertwined anti-Jewish and anti-Muslim tropes, in both cases ignoring the truths of generational suffering, making an entire faith and its individual adherents responsible for the actions of nations and governments. There is careless pity of African peoples in Sudan and the Congo. Across the continent, we are told they were practically made to suffer, always suffering, nothing but suffering. How could it possibly be otherwise? There is disdain for poor white Appalachians whose towns are now covered in mud. We are told they never vote in their own interest anyhow, so why shouldn't they suffer? All of these things are libel against our shared humanity. All of them lies specifically created to shield and enable the systems of power that are actually creating vast suffering and death, that are actually magnifying the suffering that we could be easing for one another. It is shameless. It is simple. It is wicked. I don't use words like that from this pulpit much. All these ways systems of power lie to separate us, all the ways they make some folks feel at the cost of others, that at least we're better than that, luckier than that, safer than that, more human than that. All these lies planted and blooming and leveraged to send bombs and distribute guns, to enact genocide and ecocide and feminicide with our tax dollars, with or without our consent. All of these lies that chip away at our souls which are inseparable, our souls which are bound for communion with humanity, which are whole, but only really whole when we remember that every person is a universe and each life is precious. And so we are here, drawing near to one another. We are here to resist the lies of dehumanization by drawing close, by being present to grief wherever we find it. We resist those lies with rigorously soft heart, not hardened or brittle, but tender and able to love while breaking open. We resist the lies when we move the pain of this world through our bodies in movement and words and screaming and song, when we move it through our communities in ritual and mutual care, metabolizing anger to solidarity, numbness to clarity, fear to mutual protection, and despair to grieving and powerful love. We resist the lies by healing trauma and by working to stop it everywhere it is still being exacted in our name. We resist the lies by staying ruthless in our opposition to deadly systems while staying tender in our treatment of creaturely humans. By refusing to complete people with their governments, by keeping the path to connection open, always another opportunity to turn away from the woman. We resist the lies by refusing to take brutal systems and their stories into our flesh and our own, by refusing to collaborate with those systems in the harm of others. How do we know when we are siding with the system, with the humans, and not with the system? When humans so often align themselves with systemic harm. How do we know we are getting at what is most human? We look for what is tender. We look for what is fragile and soft. We look for the pain in each one. We excavate it from below the brittleness and we dig it out from below the rage. And we find our humanness together again. We orient our lives and our hearts to rigorous care for what aches, knowing that care can soften the hardness that leads to hate, knowing that we are all human and we all ache. There is so much hurt and there is so much harm. But here's the beautiful truth. Let us whisper it to each other. Let us shout it to the sun when we wake and sing it to the moon before sleep. Every life is precious and we know it and we are willing to say it. And there are many who know it and many who say it no matter the cost, and we can join them. The many across the globe stepping into the gap between the bullet and the flash, between the bomb and the family, between the famine and the child, between the pipeline and the river, between the lie and the truth. Every life is precious. We can join them. The many who know it, who say it, no matter the cost. We are only safe together. We are each other's bonds. We draw nearer still to the ache we share. We are soft and clear and strong. May it be so.